Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Doug, and I want to welcome you to another Inner Life Talk with Guy Finley. Those people in the room here and you people online, thanks for joining us. We're glad you're here. Tonight's layout for tonight is there'll be a 90-minute class, 60-minute talk by Guy, about a 5-minute break, and about 25 minutes for Q&A with everybody who would like to participate in that way. If you have online any technical problems, you can go to the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel or email Kate at support@guyfinley.com, and that should hopefully help you with anything you need there. You can also write in a question that I can read to Guy later in the talk, so use that if you'd like. And then finally, all these free classes are brought to you by the Life of Learning Foundation, which is a nonprofit based in Southern Oregon, where Guy is the director. And if you'd like to help us and make a donation, you can do so at guyfinley.org/donate. And that link will be in the control panel there shortly. And you can do that at any time. And by the way, this is a nonprofit, and any donations in the United States are tax deductible. And we do appreciate all of those. All right, I think that's the lay of the land. I'm going to read the topic and the key lesson for tonight. And you can see it there on the screen or in the room right in front of you there. Here's tonight's topic: how to let go and enter the divine flow of life, part 2. And here's the key lesson. It's your life, your work, and at all times you receive from life what you sow into it. If you don't like what life is giving you, learn to ask for something else.
Good evening, everybody. On Wednesdays, we do something unlike the other meetings that we have. And if you've never joined us ever so briefly, what we do is that we engage in a kind of group work. Mostly I present ideas that set the stage for that group work, and then we explore together a topic, an idea. And in the exploration, we discover that the country that we are looking into, the consciousness that we are examining, is not isolated. It isn't individual at all the way we imagine it to be, but that rather we, each and every one of us, are a participant and share in the process of a mind, emotion that is very much the same for everyone we know. And there is a certain value just in that alone, because we start to realize that when it comes to certain unpleasant, painful states, we are not just the only one who suffers these things, but that there's something that we share in common with everyone who does suffer from them. And that's the purpose of our study, is to find out what it is that we share in common with every human being, meaning what is it about this consciousness that we have yet to discover that keeps us, as it does, a captive of, as we discussed on Sunday, the grab-eye, being grabbed by a particular state, suddenly in the grip of a thought or a feeling, and being pushed around. And then, as we also described, accompanying that grab-eye was the stimuli, the various associations connected to that negative state, its justification, and all of the other activities that follow, including how do we escape the fact that something has grabbed us and we don't want to be like that. if you had to count, how many times a day do you not want to be you? You honest to God, if you were actually aware, you can't count them. The only time you want to be you is when you're eating. And even then you're not really aware of yourself, you're just shoveling. But the body is happy, the mouth is complete, and so there's a sense of well-being until the food runs out or until you start judging yourself for eating the food that you shouldn't have, or overeating as most of us do. So we're going to look at a topic this evening. I hope that I can go slow enough to help you connect all of the dots, because we're going to look at an exercise in 3 parts, meaning leading up to the exercise. We're going to examine ourselves through 3 particular cases, instances, that if you'll just stay attentive as best you can, I promise you, you will see something, you will learn something that you cannot give yourself, that you can only see when we are all working together for the purpose of that exploration. So, take a nice deep breath, and I'll start with a simple question. Why do some moments seem to flow? As in those moments when we are, I don't know if you've ever done any skiing, playing a sport, basketball, golf. Why are there those moments when all of a sudden here you're coming down the slope, you're dribbling and getting ready to shoot the basketball, you're swinging the club, whatever it may be. Why is it there are those moments where it's so evident that we're in the flow? And an important distinction that in that moment, first of all, have any of you been in the flow ever? Because you're not exactly looking like a flowing group. You know, an epiphany, you're visited by an insight and you're brought into the flow of a relationship between mind and heart and body, and suddenly you just see something. You didn't create the flow, did you? But have you also noticed that if in those moments, I'll speak personally, like for instance, if I was skiing, which was some years ago, but when I was skiing, suddenly I'd find myself like, God, this isn't, the minute the mind say, this is pretty good. The split second that you were aware of the fact that you were in the flow, what happened? You weren't in the flow anymore. Just like that, in the flow, wow, I'm in the, I think I've got this swing thing with the club worked out. The minute that a person becomes self-conscious, in that same moment, are they not cast out of the flow they were in, where they weren't conscious of themselves, but they were conscious of themselves as part of the flow? We're setting the stage, yeah? Cast out of heaven. You think I'm kidding. You'll understand why I use those words, because in a manner of speaking, that is exactly what happened. For a moment, you were a participant in another order of consciousness, another order of awareness that allowed you to participate without thought for yourself or what you were doing in a series of movements of understanding, of a grace that you didn't have to take thought to participate in, but rather you became part of the whole of that movement for that moment. And that is a form of heaven, isn't it? Because that heaven, that relationship to the moment, belongs to something that we can't just willy-nilly enter into, can we? And yet if we examine our lives, what are we looking for all the time? We can say we're looking for peace, security, blah, 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 but ultimately, I would like to be someone who isn't suddenly interrupted by some disturbance that seems, and this is critical, when how many of you are disturbed by everything? I don't know what's going on, and then suddenly I'm disturbed. Now, doesn't it seem when suddenly you're disturbed that we take the fact that now we're irritable or impatient or just want to get rid of whoever that is? Don't we take that moment, the fact of that disturbance, as somehow it proves that the moment before we were in a flow? Because I didn't, why are you bothering me? I was in a flow. What's the problem? And so without knowing it, we take our resistance to moments that disturb us as evidence that the moment before we were disturbed, we were somehow in some kind of groove with life. Yes or no? And that you, they, this or them, that moment has interrupted my groove. Is groove a word anybody uses anymore? Okay. But obviously, at least it should be obvious, that those moments where I become instantly negative doesn't prove that the moment before somehow I was in the flow of life. It just means that somehow I was moving with a certain stream of thoughts and feelings identified with whatever I was identified with, and then you came along and interrupted my dream, basically. And so we take the moment where our dream is interrupted as the proof that the dream we were in was real. But the fact that I can, and by the way, are any of these disturbances welcome, or are they always rude interruptions? And then we look at people like, why would you rudely interrupt me? Can't you see I was in a dream eating my curds and whey until you got in the way and messed it up? Yes or no? So, what is the nature of that unwanted moment where suddenly it feels like the flow, you'll understand all this, the flow we were in was suddenly interrupted by someone or something that took no consideration at all for what I was experiencing. What is the nature of that unwanted moment other than there is an instantaneous point of friction that seems to come out of nowhere, and that friction, when it comes, infers that the moment before I was without that friction. I was somehow or other content or happy. Yes or no? And when that resistance suddenly appears to whatever someone says or does because they have interrupted my flow, what goes next when that has been interrupted by somebody? What do I flow into seamlessly after someone irritates me? I flow streamlessly, ceaselessly into a host of negative states. And I am, at that point, in the flow. Try to put all this together. I'm in the flow at that point of something in me that is not only identified, the stimuli, not only identified what it is that grabbed me, and it's you, but more importantly, part of the flow of those negative thoughts and feelings is this struggle to start trying to change the condition or the circumstance that I'm blaming for the suffering that I'm experiencing in that moment. So I'm sitting there, I think I'm in a flow, you come along, somehow or other, instantaneously there's this big no, I'm disturbed, up comes this resistance and this reaction, and that flows seamlessly into the next stage of me doing what? Trying to figure out what do I have to do to get back into the flow. Get rid of you, get you to apologize, eat something, distract myself. And then when we're able to do that, the problem seems to go away and the pleasure returns of being in the flow or in a dream that we don't know we're in a dream in that moment. And we know the answer, yes? Now, take a nice deep breath. We're going to make a transition, an important one. We all know this friction, that sudden, when something grabs us, yeah? That friction, which can you see is in fact by its nature and all that it produces, that friction is a kind of blockage of a very real nature in any possibility of flowing along with a new understanding, flowing into an insight. Can you see that resistance separates instantly, doesn't it? So that the thing that I'm giving myself to, trying to flow into what I need to flow into through struggling with this situation, is actually antithetical to the task that I really want, which is to understand the nature of what just took place so that I can have a real life and not be caught up as I'm always caught up by these grab-eyes. Here's the point. There is no moment in and of itself that is ever an obstruction to your happiness. There is no moment ever in and of itself that is an obstruction to the flow of life. Now let that sink in. I want everybody to really let that. Do you not think when somebody says this to you, or you get this email, or you get some news, do you not instantaneously look at that condition and go, obstruction? I object. What did I say? Objection. I object. Yes or no? I object because suddenly you, they, this, them, what was said, what didn't get done, I see that as a major obstruction in the flow of my life. Yes or no? Yes. But the real cause of that moment, if we can understand it, and look, what would happen, let me back up a little bit and slow down. What would happen if you understood that no moment that you meet in life can obstruct you, keep you from being in the flow of life? What if what you see as the obstruction isn't the obstruction at all? That's the question. Do you understand it? How many of you have people that they're dead and they're still an obstruction in your life? So I want you to see, which we're going to prove to great lengths, that whatever appears with the moment that this nature sees as an obstruction and to be resisted is not at all an obstruction at all, but is rather the product of a mind that, asleep to itself, has imagined prior to that moment that it is in a flow of some kind. In other words, I'm so identified with my own thoughts and feelings, with the work at hand, whatever it may be, I'm so identified with that I call that identification with my actions the flow of the moment. And to be clear, and you will one day understand this, whatever you are identified with is the antithesis of being in the flow. Because identification always sets you outside of the moment where real flow exists and places you in a surreptitious flow that belongs to a mind, a level of consciousness that believes that by being asleep, captured by what it wants, going after what it needs, thinking about how to change that moment, that flow actually can bring an individual to the end of the disturbance that brought them to that point where they're trying to fix themselves and fix the flow they're in. I'm hoping I'm communicating with you, am I? The truth be known that in those moments, the pain we're in, that we blame the obstruction on, is because we, without knowing it, are in direct opposition to the moment itself. In direct opposition to the flow of the moment itself. So we say, no, the moment opposes me. Yes or no? The moment does not oppose you. You, without knowing it, unconsciously are identified with something that places you in opposition to anything that challenges your identity. You get it? So not only are we outside of this divine flow, which I'm going to explain to you, and don't know we're outside of it, but in our spiritual ignorance, what am I trying to do in that moment where I look at you or this or that and I say, that's an obstruction. What am I actually trying to do in that moment when I see that obstruction as something outside of me? What am I trying to do? I'm trying to restore the flow. Because I think I know what the flow is, and you just messed with it. I was pretty happy sitting there by myself until I looked at your face. I'm talking to you guys out there. Do you understand? I didn't have a problem, and then you walked in, and you brought me a problem. You're not supposed to bring me a problem. Don't you understand? I'm busy solving problems on my own, meaning I'm trying to get whatever I see as in the way out of the way, so that when it's out of the way, when you finally obey, when they finally are all lined up the way they're supposed to be, merrily, merrily downstream I go, floating in bliss. Something like that. Yes or no? Yes. All right. Now, first of all, how many of you have restored the flow to your life 100,000 times? Yes or no? I got them straight. Got that idiot straightened out. I got that circumstance cleared up. I got the plan down. I'm flowing with the beauty of the expectation of what I'm going to become when finally I get rid of these things that are obstructing me. And in those moments, we fail to see that for everything that we have imagined as a way to resolve the condition that interrupted with the contentment of our flow in the moment, every last one of those resolutions has done what? Did we stay in the flow? Or by the very imagining of the thing required to restore the flow, did I create, without knowing it, the next obstruction in the flow? Didn't I? Because I thought to myself, well, if I just did this, that's what I'm going to do. Flow, 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 flow. Oh, no. Now what? And I look at that moment that seems to be an obstruction, and it wouldn't have existed for me if I hadn't imagined that somehow or other I needed to be or do or have that to produce the flow. So what we do is we discover that all of these movements that we participate in trying to restore what we call the flow of our life are incomplete at best actions, which means what? Because I still, don't you just automatically go to that? Did you ever wonder why it is that you can't stop thinking? Do you know how punished you are by your thoughts? It is one day you will be staggered at the suffering that you see in the faces and friends of family that cannot stop thinking. What are they trying to do with all of that thinking? What are you trying to do with all of that thinking? I want to get rid of the things that are problems. Isn't that what's behind all the thought? Because I just think if I think enough, I'll finally pop out of this problem and I'll float again. I'll be all happy again. And here I am. I'm 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and maybe pretty soon I'll say 80 years old. And I'm still crashing into rock after rock after rock, believing that I've steered my way into some tributary that's going to take me free of this torment, and it doesn't. So what do I need? Segue. I need new eyes to be able to start seeing what the real world is, because I don't see the real world. I see the world made in my own image. That's what everybody sees, is the world made in their own image. And then when the world that has been made in my image, that you should be like this, or they should be like that, or I need to become this, or one day I'll have that, anytime anything interrupts with the image that I'm identified with, that moment is what we call the obstruction. Yes, it is what creates the friction between me and the condition blamed for this obstruction. And it is the source of every action I'm going to take after that to try to restore something that wouldn't have even existed if I hadn't fallen asleep and become identified with something that I thought was going to free me. Following me? Okay. Take a nice deep breath. I want to show you something. And I can't show it to you if you resist seeing it. All you have to do is just see the fact of it. I hope to spell it out clearly enough so you can't miss it. You ready? You and I, our lives, every creature that has ever been created, each and all are, in fact, participants in an absolutely timeless circulation of life. Every creature is unendingly being not just acted on, but carried along by the forces of a divine flow, an emanation, the word that never stops. It never is not moving. What would happen? What happens to your body if your heart stops beating? If my blood isn't circulating, do I live? Looks like some people do, doesn't it? No. There is a circulation. Now, I'm just going to take a few minutes to spell this out as best I can for you. There is no body that doesn't have a circulation. Obviously, our body has a circulation. And that circulation requires on what? Depends on what? It depends on another order of circulation. And that other order of circulation, for instance, the earth sitting circling the sun. Isn't the earth and the sun themselves in a circulation system? The sun, it's moving around the center of our universe, galaxy, our galaxy. Our earth moves around the sun that's circulating around the major sun in the center of our galaxy. And all of the interaction of all the planets, though we don't know it, all of those energies are in a constant circulation. So all the combined circulation of all these things come in, and our planet receives all of these energies, these magnetic, invisible, infinite forces. And the body of the earth takes all that in, and it has a circulation of its own. What do you think the winds are, the currents of the ocean? Some of us were out playing golf on Saturday, and there was about 100 of these tiny little beautiful ducks. I don't know what they are. They're not wood ducks. They're really tiny ducks. And they're all in this like a certain movement, and they're all walking along with their little mouth snipping off the grass, you know, like that. And you see something like that and you don't understand. Those ducks are an instrument in the circulation of life, because they are taking the grass, they are ingesting it so that they can go on and have baby ducks and continue the species. And what their droppings feed the ground that they'll come back to. And that there is this breath. There is an unending celestial movement that is the circulation of a timeless body, a body you can't see. And yet without the body and its circulation, there would be no life at all. So everything is supported by this endless renewal that these forces in this divine flow ensure remains in place. Now, hold that. You got the picture? I don't know if you know this, but I remember years and years ago, I was stunned by it. Did you know that you and I are drinking the same water that the dinosaurs drank 50 million years ago? That we're planting our crops, our flowers in the same earth that first was brought into formation by the circulation of certain energies that coalesced into a body, that there's no new earth that's made, there's no new water that's made, there's no new air that's made. We're breathing the same air that human creatures, or any creature, a gazillion years ago breathed. Don't you? It's fantastic. And why is it fantastic? Because we can't see it, but all of that is what? Would we be able to breathe and drink that unless it were what? Renewed. So that everything in an invisible circulation system is, by the nature of its circulation, being transformed from one form into another, refreshed, revitalized, and then brought back into another form that serves the forms that it formerly left. Everything renewed, renewed, renewed. Yes or no? Do you see it with me? When you think about it, a farmer, he tills the soil. When he tills the soil, what's he doing? He's turning over the ground. He's taking the top part that's been used and he's turning it under so that what was under then can come to the top and then do what the top can no longer do because it's been depleted. And then under other circumstances, then that farmer will nourish the ground so that the whole thing can be renewed. And where does he get what he renews the ground with? Is it new? Or is it something else that was created through that creation? I'm just trying to get you to see a big picture, if you can see it at all with me. I hope you can. Even the story of the prodigal son is the story of a circulation. Did you know the original meaning of the son was not Christ the Son, it was Christ the Son, S-U-N. Originally, that which gives life, that light which gives life. Our sun and our whole galaxy moves through a circulation system where roughly every 24,000 years or so, we make a giant circle around the center of our galaxy. And each of those sections in the movement of our solar system is actually a season of a sort. So we have like 6,000 year seasons. And each one represents, very much as we understand the seasons of the earth, a certain possibility that exists only when that season is in place. So that the circulation of all these things often determines what it is that can be born out of the renewal of all these things that go through this constant divine flow. I'm probably taking too much time on this. You get this idea? So please now juxtapose what we just talked about, which is what? Is there an obstruction in the circulation? Is there an obstruction in the circulation? Is there? That's impossible. Everything's being renewed. So how can there be an obstruction in this flow? There can't be, can there? Please, you know what I'm trying to do with you, don't you? Because I'm pretty darn sure there's an obstruction. I just look at you, Chica. You're an obstruction. What I have to do, it's an obstruction. I have to go, what? That's an obstruction. I'm getting old? What an obstruction. On and on. Everything's a problem for me to resist because I see the thing I blame my pain on as being an obstruction to me, my life. My life, your life, God help us to see it, doesn't exist outside of the circulation, outside of the divine flow. Because without the divine flow, what have you got? Zombies. What Christ said, let the dead bury the dead. He was talking about men and women who are so removed from the divine flow and that celestial circulation of life and light that they live, as most of us do today, in a certain circumstance where they are literally cut off. A world apart from what is real. Apart from it. Try to see this. I know it's hard to swallow. I'm trying to make this as palatable as I can. Do you think to yourself that you're apart from real life? Do you? You don't think that. Why? Because my life is real. And I know it's real because I have to do these things to make sure it stays okay. Look at my face. That's not life. Life is renewal. Life is participation in a celestial process that ensures everyone and everything in that flow is renewed and liberated every moment because they are a participant in it. You following me? And where does that leave me? You and I, excuse me, living in a dream state that, how should I say this? That exists because I have imagined who I am. And in imagining who I am, everything's done. The paradigm is complete in the dream. I try to follow. What does that mean? The paradigm is complete in the dream. When you have a dream, do you ever think to yourself, now wait a minute, that doesn't make sense that a four-nosed giant blue ghost just appeared? No, it makes perfect sense in the paradigm of the dream, doesn't it? So everything makes perfect sense to us in the paradigm of a dream, of being someone who is responsible for ensuring that everything flows the way I know it should flow. And then without even understanding it, the very paradigm that we live in creates the prison of constantly struggling to restore a flow that was imagined to begin with. Hands, yes? Where each moment, more or less, without our understanding it, is at once, and here's where words fail, where each moment is part of that circulation. What we call passing time is our experience of a timeless order. Creation reveals a timeless order, but it reveals it as moving through time. This timeless order that you and I are already a part of has its own timeless circulation and its own flow. Yes? If you're following this, and I beg that you at least shake off if you haven't been able to, I ask you a question now. Isn't our reaction to every moment, how do I re-enter the flow? Isn't that the reaction? And at a certain point, when you start to struggle with all that, and then you think to yourself, which is to the point of this talk, how do I enter the divine flow? Because that's what this talk is about, right? How do I enter the divine flow? Yes or no? And isn't everything all the time, if you watch yourself, reading, thinking, studying, worrying, hating, judging, isn't everything about how do I get back into that flow? Yes or no? Yes. It's the wrong question. Why am I asking, how do I get back into it if I've never left it? If I'm actually a part of that circulation, do I have to figure out how to re-enter it? Or is every effort that I make to re-enter into that flow something that sits outside of it and believes that it knows what the flow is? That's a critical point. Did you get it? The real question isn't how do I enter the divine flow? The real question is what in the name of God has deluded me, deceived me into believing that I'm outside of it? Look, try to see it. I don't know. I'm sorry. We all agree that at least two of us have had a moment of being in the flow. Yes? So where did the flow come from? Did you create it or did you enter into it? If you entered into it, was it magically manifested because you were skiing or playing golf or doing what you were dancing? Was it magically manifested, or did you happen to, for a moment, slip into a coincidental relationship with a condition that was there prior to you realizing it? That's the case, isn't it? And if it takes place once, if I know it exists, why am I outside of it? Because it's always there. This is so hard to talk about. The best I can do is bring up a certain understanding and try to evolve you into understanding that there is no moment that divine circulation isn't taking place. And if it's always taking place, why am I not in the place where I know that? Because what could be better? When suddenly you have an epiphany, even if it's a tough one, a shock of some kind, you've entered into a flow of a new order of understanding, have you not? And in that sudden new understanding, you're relieved from the former burden of believing that somehow you have to do something to get things straightened out. Because you know for a fact now, because you were in that flow for that split second, that you were outside of it and thinking that you knew what it was, and now you know you were blind and now you see. Please? What's keeping me out of that flow? 38 minutes just to get to that question. You ready? Because now we're going to start our group work. Take a nice deep breath. Remember what we're solving for. We're created. The truth is we're actually a cornerstone of a certain part of that circulation, if you must know. Because there are certain junctions that exist between levels of being. And that circulation, we have a very distinct role in it, but that's another talk for another time. So here's the question. You ready? Let's bring up our list, please. There it is. What negative states, otherwise painful characters or qualities in yourself, do you struggle with sometimes on a daily basis? What negative states or otherwise painful characters or qualities in yourself do you struggle with sometimes on a daily basis? Now, before I start taking hands, and I'm going to invite everybody out there, you can see the question. I'll just seed it so that everybody gets the idea of what are some of these negative states that I struggle with on a daily basis. How about as simple as this? How many of you struggle with impatience? And I struggle with impatience. And what am I impatient with when I'm struggling with my impatience? I'm impatient with the obstacle, the obstruction in my life. Get out of here. How about fear? Is that not a negative state that I am caught up in? Am I not grabbed by that? And then what do I always do when I have that fear come? I try to do what? I try to get rid of the condition that I blame that conflict on. Okay, so now over to you. What are some of the negative states, otherwise painful characters, that you struggle with on a daily basis? Mike?
Fawning.
Fawning?
Fawning.
Yeah, fawning. So I don't want to fawn. I know it's not good for me. So this is another thing. I know that these things that we're going to make this list, I know they're not good for me. I don't do the good that I would. I act out the state I would not and then judge myself for it. Terry? Regret on a daily basis, caught up in regret. Grabbed by regret. Ellen?
Discouragement.
Grabbed by discouragement. Remember, we're talking about this reaction that I identify with, and suddenly I'm grabbed by discouragement. Now, why am I grabbed by discouragement just ever so quickly? Because I look out at life and I see this obstruction. I'm never going to get past this problem in my life. I'm going to die someone who will carry to their grave this regret and pity that I have for myself. Too strong? Not strong enough. On the board here, Rob says anxiety. Claudia, frustrated because that just messed with my planned out day. Kate, distrust. Kathleen, resistance. Paul, a broken heart. If you'll forgive me, how many of you struggle with a broken record? You get the message? Because isn't every last one of these things we struggle with part of a broken record? And who puts, almost said a bad word, who puts the darn record on and drops the needle on it? Let's go on, Chris.
Unseen demands on people's lives.
I am in a daily struggle with the demands that I place on life. Although, let's be honest, you don't really struggle with the demand. You struggle with something that demands that you ask of people to be what you want them to be. Yeah? John? I'm instantaneously judgmental. I am visited all the time by a negative state of blaming others. Who else had one up? Debbie? Worrying about the future. Patricia?
Controlling others.
And look, if I don't control you, how's my... Come on. If I don't control you, how's my life going to flow? Does anybody see a problem with that? So I'm so busy controlling you that I have absolutely no idea that I'm stuck with the idea that unless you'll be who I need you to be, I'm never going to be in the flow again. Am I in the flow when I'm trying to control something? What flow am I in? I'm in the flow of a stimuli and the grabbi that is created there that is trying to get everything tied down again. And listen to this, tied down so I can be in the flow. See, it's actually insane when we take it apart, isn't it? One more, Barbara.
Comparing myself to other people.
Yeah, comparison. It's a nightmare. So over to the board ever so quickly. Worried, judgment, irritated with the messenger of bad news. Yeah. Uncertainty, dissatisfaction, resentment, unhappiness, being interrupted, superiority, distraction. Watching YouTube and getting annoyed. What would just turn it off? All right. So, because we've got so much to go through, it's exhausting, isn't it? Now, these conditions that we just described that seem to be part of what we would call an unwanted circulation of painful conditions that produce this conflict in us, are they really circulating negative states, or are they fixed in a consciousness that always responds in the same way? So the state's fixed in this consciousness. This is important to understand. The condition does not create the state. The condition reveals a consciousness that is prone to those states whenever that condition seems to obstruct with what it's identified and what it says is part of the flow of its life. Everybody still following me? All right. Now, these movements were picked up and grabbed, and everything in us is dedicated to doing what seems to us very natural in that moment. Doesn't it seem very natural to you? Now, just again, let this sink in. You may not know it, but I'm pulling the threads out of the tapestry called you. Doesn't it seem absolutely natural to be caught up in what is ultimately a self-destructive state? I don't think to myself, I'm in a self-destructive state when I'm negative. Do you? No, I think I'm in the place where I'm going to destroy the obstruction. So what's happened, as hard as it is to imagine, is that we've become dependent on negative states for the sense of certainty they provide for us, failing to see that no negative state, let alone what it's provided for me, has ever liberated me the way it promises when it says, just do this, get that done, fix that person, and everything will be flowing for you again. I want you to see it. I want you to see how without you knowing it happens to you, you depend upon getting negative. But we blame the negativity that we're experiencing on the condition we say is the obstruction. But there is no condition that's the obstruction that's producing the negativity. The negativity belongs to an order of consciousness that has become dependent and demanding on something outside of itself to always be fixed so it can flow. No, it should be. It's mind-boggling that we can be so asleep that we would just remand ourselves over to whatever that thought is, whatever that movement is, whatever that painful image is that's visiting us, without ever asking ourselves, which we don't, who or what has made me into this human being? Because would I be someone who actually depended upon the strength of a negative reaction to set myself free? I would never do it, would I? Would you? Now, part 3 of this exploration. Are any of these negative qualities on the board? Scroll through them just for the grin, would you? Just keep going. Let everybody see the whole list. Yeah, come on. Roll through, come on, faster. Okay, so here's 20 or 30 negative states, fairly common to all of us, yeah? Do any of those negative states exist by themselves? Do you understand the question? Can I be, for instance, angry with anything unless prior to me becoming angry and getting negative, I had some idea or image of how that should go? So that the anger, the negative state, and everything I do to fix the condition belonged to a condition that was in place before the anger appeared. Did you get that? Were you able to follow it? No. Look, how many of you at least suspect to some extent, how am I doing on time? To some extent, how many of you suspect that there are certain circumstances, certain people, certain places that you don't want to go to, get involved with it at all? Yes or no? Because why? Because before I even do it, I'm negative. Well, how can I be negative about a condition that doesn't exist outside of what I've imagined it is, unless the negativity is a product of my own imagination? Anxiety. How many of you are anxious all the time, rushing? Can I get anxious over any moment, fearful, without somewhere in the back of that mind, that sleeping consciousness, a dream where all that is necessary and natural for me to flow through life freely with no fears whatsoever has been established in this particular idea of how I need to be and what I need to have. And as long as I have that, no anxiety. But the minute you step out of line or the world decides to go left instead of right, what comes up? Anxiety. So the anxiety, this negative state, doesn't exist without some preconditioned state in this conditioned mind that's dependent on that idea or image to ensure it feels secure and flowing through life. Understand what I'm trying to get to with you? Some conditioned part of our consciousness that we have no idea is there is already attached and depending on some image it made for itself. Do you know that you have the image of yourself as someone who under no circumstances should ever be bothered by lesser beings? Do you? How many of you are bothered by lesser beings? All the time. You bother yourself. I'm an irritant unto myself. How can I be an irritant unto myself? Because without knowing it, over time, this consciousness, and not just in the simple time that you and I have been alive, this consciousness has been deeply, deeply conditioned. Conditioned to believe that the images that it holds of itself, that it created in order through a desire to free itself from some past pain, that those images, the more I have of them and the more I can secure them, the freer I am to flow through life. Where we can see it's just the opposite of that. The more identified we are with any image, the more negative we get when something challenges the condition that we've imagined we have to have. So can you see that there is this dark circulation in an unconscious mind that creates for itself the condition it says it has to have to be content, and the very condition it imagines is the source of its discontentment. And then it tries to flow through that moment by changing the condition that no matter how many times it changes, doesn't change anything. And why doesn't it change anything? Because it's simply dependent on another image in order to produce the next flowing moment for itself. Everybody still hear me? Let's get to the exercise. I'm going to stop for a second. So here I am, I'm struggling with these negative states. Yes? And the struggle is to do what? We've been talking about it. Why am I struggling with this anger, this anxiety, this fear? For one thing, I'm struggling with it, and listen to this, because I'm not supposed to have it. Yes or no? I'm not supposed to feel like that. Yes or no? And where does that friction, where does that conflict come from? I'm not supposed to feel like that. Where does it come from? Does it exist without an image of myself as being someone who's other than that? It doesn't exist without that image, does it? So the very conflict of not wanting to be this angry, anxious, frightening person, the very The very condition itself doesn't exist without a consciousness divided and looking at who it should be and judging what it sees as what I am. And that consciousness is looking at an image of itself. And if the image were real, I wouldn't be the opposite of it, would I? Do you understand the point? So the struggle that we're in is always to alter or change the condition that we blame in order to do what with it? Try to see this. My mind, out of all the possibilities in the world, will seize onto a problem, a worry, a doubt, all the things that I could possibly consider. And my mind will anchor itself onto one problem, yes or no. And when it anchors itself under that one problem, what is it actually trying to do as it takes what is a molehill and turns it into a mountain? What is it trying to do? Listen, it is trying to take God, if you could see this, the immensity of the problem it has. Is the condition an immense problem? Or is the immensity of the problem in proportion to the identification with the condition we blame the problem on? It is. It's all proportional. I need to get this whole thing, I'm going to resize the moment. Do you know what it means to resize the moment? I'm going to reshape it. I got to go to work on this moment that's a problem, and one way or the other, I'm going to do something to make it fit what it was supposed to be like to begin with, so that when I finally get the whole thing reduced, corrected, justified, then it'll take its natural place in the flow that I say it's interrupted. When the flow that got interrupted doesn't exist without the condition and the demand I've placed on it that my life be what it is that I want it to be. It's impossible. And if I can't, and how many of you knows this? Sometimes I can't, no matter how much I try to squeeze that moment, I'm going to crush that man. I'm going to crush that problem. I'm going to get it. And every once in a while, you just can't get it, can you? And when you can't reshape the moment into something that allows you to resume the imagined flow, what do you do then? Then I begin to reshape myself. I start to think through, well, you know what, Guy, you really need to be a different kind of person. And where do I get the idea of the new person I'm going to be? From the content of my own consciousness that produced the condition that I couldn't change and reshape. So now I'm going to reshape myself into someone who's more likely to flow. I'm going to be a tolerant human being. What an absolute nonsense. If I can't shape the moment into something that fits the parameter of the flow that I want, then I'll simply judge myself and squish myself into something that will allow me at least to feel like I'm moving with the moment again and everything's copacetic. Do you see this, please, important, before I go on? Now, if we've understood, coming to the end, if we've understood the lessons here, the task is not to try and make life fit into the flow of what we've imagined the flow of life should be. Yes or no? The task is not to try to make life fit into the flow. Can you see at this point how ludicrous that is? I'm going to make life that, by the way, is never static and is always recirculating and changing one form into another. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed. This beautiful celestial process of endless transformation, of which you and I are a part and intended to participate in that, so that there is never, should I do this? So that there's never any residual experience of the moment. What do you judge? You don't judge the moment, you judge the residual experience your mind created of it. No residual experience. Can you imagine the freedom? You have to reach for this. How many of you can at least sense what I'm saying? Look at this. And then I know, Guy, you're a terrible person. Don't feel like that. You're right. I should be like this. And all the time, that consciousness creating form after form, imagination after imagination, and producing out of the original moment in which that flow was that flow was revealing the content of everything in that circulation. Out of that circulation that should have brought about a new birth, instead there's the residue of an experience of someone who doesn't want what happened, and now I live my life trying to resolve the residue of something that wouldn't exist without something outside of that circulation. If you can follow that, yes? You're getting the drift of it? If I've understood that, then the task, rather than trying to, as we've always done our whole life, isn't to make life fit into the flow as we've imagined it, but to do what? To use the struggle, the resistance that we feel in that moment, to release ourselves from the unconscious nature that holds that view. One of two things can happen. Here's the resistance, you know that, we talked about it. Here's the negative state, here's the grab-I. We know what that's like. Boom, I'm grabbed. And immediately that resistance is turned into something that identifies the obstruction, instead of allowing the moment of that resistance to bring us into an awareness that there is no obstruction, were it not for me being identified with my idea of security or how people should be or whatever it might be. Still with me? It's the mistaken relationship that this consciousness has with life that has to be understood, not trying to change the consciousness and the life into something that can make our life flow in the way we want it to. Here's the exercise, and it's not, how do I say this? You're going to have to work with this. If I actually see what I've just described to you, pick an instance in your own life. Take one of those negative states most familiar to you. Fear, insecurity, anger, disappointment, one of your daily visitors. If I actually, in that moment, am visited by that stimuli, by that negative state, if I actually am visited by it, if I understand that in that moment, that consciousness is blaming the pain and conflict it's in on a condition that it says is obstructing its flow, and I understand there is no such obstruction, what am I left with to do? I understand that my fears, my worries, my angers, my resentment, I understand that they only exist because there is something in me that came into that moment with a demand and expectation of some kind, and now I, for the first time, recognize it is not my task to get this condition to line up the way I need to so I can go back to a flow. My task is to see that when I identify with that negative state, I'm taken out of the flow, so that I resolve myself in that way to, and this is what's so hard for us to understand. Are you ready? I can't save myself. I can't save myself. What is every last thought? What is every feeling? All of that moves through you. What's it doing? It's that consciousness trying to save itself. Because it says it's a captive of this thing. That person, their attitude, why are they like this? Why are people that way? I'm a captive of that. You're not a captive of any condition other than being asleep to a consciousness that creates them. So that in dragging you into its considerations, you can serve its life and lose your own. The most difficult thing in the world that you will ever do as an aspirant, now or any point in the future, is to meet over and over again the sudden onset of that negative state that tells you by its arrival, the condition is the obstruction, fix him, fix that, and instead of doing that, bring yourself back and understand, because you've seen the fact of it. This is part of a movement, a circulation. Something divine is flowing. I'm a part of it. I don't need to get stuck trying to do what? Saving myself, because you've never done it. You've never done it. Everything you've done to save yourself has turned out to be the next anchor in your life, the next idea, image, next desire that you believe is going to free you, and it doesn't free you if you've listened to me at all, because nothing can free you. You're already free. You just don't know it. Let's take a break, come back and have our dialogue.